The year is 1918. The Great War has just ended. Millions of men are returning home to America, hoping to rebuild their lives. But when they arrive at their family farms, they find something shocking. Nothing has changed. The fields still stretch endlessly under the same sun. Horses still pull the same plows their grandfathers used. And every harvest still depends on backbreaking labor from dawn until dusk. In the heart of Iowa, a young man stands at the edge of his father's cornfield, watching the horizon. His hands are calloused from years of manual work. His mind, however, is somewhere else entirely. He's thinking about machines, about chemistry, about the future. His name is Henry Wallace, and he's about to change everything. Main narration. The end of World War I marked a turning point in human history. Industry had proven its power. Tanks rolled across Europe, airplanes dominated the skies, and factories produced weapons at unprecedented scales. Yet, back home in America, the agricultural heartland remained frozen in time. In 1918, fewer than 5% of American farms owned tractors. The technology existed, but it was expensive, unreliable, and unfamiliar. Most farmers couldn't afford the risk. They trusted what they knew: horses, oxen, and human muscle. A typical Midwestern farm might have 6 to 8 horses just to work the land. Feeding those animals consumed nearly a quarter of the farm's own production. The average American farmer in 1918 worked 12 to 14 hours a day during planting and harvest seasons. A single acre of wheat required approximately 50 hours of human labor to cultivate, plant, maintain, and harvest using traditional methods. For corn, the numbers were even higher. Families lived and died by the rhythms of nature and the limitations of animal power. But the world was changing faster than the farms could keep up. Europe was devastated. Russia was in revolution. Millions faced starvation. The demand for American grain exploded overnight. The United States was being called the breadbasket of the world. Yet the country struggled to meet even domestic needs, let alone feed a desperate continent across the Atlantic. Food prices soared. Farmers worked harder than ever, but production barely increased. The problem wasn't effort or dedication. The problem was efficiency. The problem was scale. The problem was that America's agricultural system was still operating with 19th century technology in a 20th century world. Into this moment of crisis stepped a generation of innovators who believed that science, not tradition, would save agriculture. Among them was Henry Wallace, not yet famous, not yet powerful, but already convinced that farming could become a science rather than just a way of life. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and stay with us until the end. This isn't just a story about tractors or corn. This is the story of how human ingenuity transformed desperation into abundance, and how one generation's impossible dream became the foundation for feeding billions. The reality of American agriculture in the late 1910s was brutal and unforgiving. To understand why the tractor revolution mattered so much, you need to understand what life was actually like for the millions of farm families across the country. Consider a typical 160-acre farm in Iowa or Nebraska, the backbone of American grain production. The farmer would wake before sunrise, often around 4:30 a.m., regardless of season. His first task was always the same: feeding and harnessing the horses. Those horses were the difference between survival and failure, so they had to be maintained meticulously. By 5:30 a.m., the real work began. Plowing a single acre with a horse-drawn plow took approximately 4 hours. The horses could work maybe 6 hours a day before exhaustion set in. This meant that on a good day, in perfect weather, a farmer could plow about 1.5 acres. To prepare just 80 acres for spring planting, half the farm, would require nearly 2 solid months of work, assuming no rain delays, no equipment breakdowns, and no sick horses. Then came planting. Seeds had to be placed by hand or with crude mechanical seeders that were almost as slow as manual work. Weeding meant walking the rows throughout the summer, hour after hour, removing invasive plants one by one. Harvest time was the worst. Wheat and corn had to be cut, bundled, shocked, and threshed, all processes requiring multiple workers and many days per field. A family farm wasn't a business in the modern sense. It was a survival operation. Every member contributed. Children as young as 6 or 7 had assigned chores. Women worked the fields alongside men during critical periods, then returned to the house for cooking, cleaning, and preserving food for winter. There was no such thing as a weekend. There were no vacations. The farm demanded everything, always. And yet, despite this tremendous effort, yields remained stubbornly low by modern standards. A good corn harvest might produce 30 bushels per acre. Wheat averaged 14 to 15 bushels. Compare that to today, when hybrid genetics and mechanized farming can produce 180 bushels of corn per acre or 50 bushels of wheat. The difference isn't just technology. It's a complete transformation of what's possible. But in 1918, nobody knew those numbers were achievable. Most farmers simply accepted that land had natural limits. You worked as hard as humanly possible, prayed for good weather, and hoped you'd break even after expenses. Debt was normal. Poverty was expected. Sending children to college was a fantasy. The emotional toll was immense. Farm families lived in constant anxiety about weather, pests, and markets. A single hailstorm could destroy months of work. A drought could bankrupt generations of careful saving. And because individual farms were so small and isolated, there was little collective bargaining power when selling crops. Middlemen and railroad companies controlled prices, and farmers took whatever was offered. This was the world that needed to change. This was the crisis that demanded innovation. And slowly, almost invisibly at first, the solution was beginning to emerge from workshops, experimental stations, and the minds of people who refused to accept that things had to stay this way forever. Henry Wallace was one of those people. Born in 1888 in rural Iowa, he grew up watching his father struggle with the same problems every farmer faced. But Wallace had something many others didn't: access to education and ideas. His grandfather founded the influential agricultural newspaper Wallace's Farmer. His father would later become Secretary of Agriculture under Presidents Harding and Coolidge. Young Henry grew up surrounded by discussions about soil science, crop genetics, and agricultural economics. But he never forgot what he saw in the fields. He never forgot the exhaustion in his father's eyes after a failed harvest. He never forgot the quiet desperation of neighbors who lost their farms to debt. Those memories would drive everything he did for the rest of his life. The tractor wasn't invented in 1918. Crude steam-powered traction engines had existed since the 1890s, and some wealthy farmers in the Midwest owned these massive, expensive machines. But they were impractical for most applications. They weighed several tons, required constant maintenance, consumed enormous amounts of fuel, and cost more than most farms were worth. Everything changed when Henry Ford turned his attention from automobiles to agriculture. Ford himself had grown up on a Michigan farm and hated every minute of it. He once said, "I have followed many a weary mile behind a plow, and I know all the drudgery of it." When he achieved success with the Model T automobile, he became obsessed with applying the same mass production principles to tractors. In 1917, Ford launched the Fordson tractor. It was a revolution. Unlike the massive steam engines, the Fordson was relatively compact, weighing about 2,700 pounds. It ran on gasoline or kerosene, was simple enough for one person to operate, and most importantly, it was affordable. Ford priced the Fordson at $750 in 1918, roughly equivalent to the cost of 3 good horses. The Fordson could plow 10 acres in a single day. Let that sink in. What took 2 months with horses could now be done in 8 days with a machine. The tractor didn't get tired. It didn't need to be fed year-round. It didn't get sick. And it could pull implements that would be impossible for animals. But adoption wasn't immediate or universal. Farmers are, by necessity, conservative. Their lives depend on reliable methods. Trying something new and having it fail could mean losing the farm. So many waited and watched as their neighbors experimented with these roaring, smoke-belching machines. The early adopters faced real challenges. Tractors broke down frequently. Spare parts were hard to find in rural areas. Operating them required mechanical knowledge that most farmers didn't have. There were injuries and even deaths as people learned to work with powerful machinery. Insurance companies initially refused to cover tractor-related accidents. Yet, slowly, undeniably, the numbers spoke for themselves. Farms with tractors were simply more productive. They could cultivate more land with fewer workers. They could respond faster to weather windows. They could take advantage of market opportunities that required quick planting or harvesting. By 1920, approximately 200,000 tractors were in operation across America. By 1925, that number had tripled. The agricultural landscape was transforming before everyone's eyes. Horses that had been essential for thousands of years of farming were becoming obsolete in a single generation. This transition created both winners and losers. Larger farms that could afford tractors expanded rapidly, buying up land from struggling neighbors. Small farms that couldn't mechanize found it increasingly difficult to compete. Rural communities began to shrink as fewer workers were needed in the fields. Some saw this as progress. Others saw it as the destruction of a way of life. Henry Wallace understood both sides of this transformation. He promoted mechanization through his family's newspaper and his work with agricultural colleges. But he also worried about the social consequences. He believed that technology alone wasn't enough. Farmers also needed better seeds, better techniques, and better economic policies to ensure that increased productivity actually translated to improved lives. Wallace began conducting his own experiments with corn genetics. He meticulously tracked which varieties produced higher yields under different conditions. He studied Gregor Mendel's principles of heredity and wondered if they could be applied systematically to crop improvement. These weren't just idle curiosities. Wallace believed that combining better machines with better genetics could double or triple American agricultural output within a generation. If you're finding this journey through agricultural history as fascinating as we do, hit that like button. It helps more people discover stories about the real innovators who shaped our modern world. While tractors revolutionized labor efficiency, Henry Wallace was working on an equally important front: the plants themselves. In the early 1920s, corn yields had barely changed in 50 years. Farmers saved seeds from their best plants each year, hoping to maintain quality. But this traditional method had limits. Without understanding genetics, improvement was random and slow. Wallace approached farming the way a scientist approaches a laboratory experiment. He planted thousands of test plots, carefully noting which varieties performed best under specific conditions. He cross-pollinated different strains, tracked the results over multiple generations, and slowly began to understand the principles that would create the first true hybrid corn. The breakthrough came from understanding hybrid vigor, the phenomenon where crossing two genetically distinct parent lines produces offspring that outperform either parent. Wallace wasn't the first to notice this effect, but he was among the first to systematically exploit it for commercial agriculture. In 1926, Wallace founded the Hybrid Corn Company, later renamed Pioneer Hybrid. His goal was simple but revolutionary: create scientifically developed corn varieties that would produce 20 to 30% more grain per acre than traditional open-pollinated varieties. Skeptics were everywhere. Farmers asked why they should pay for hybrid seeds every year when they could save their own for free. Agricultural traditionalists argued that nature knew best and that human interference would lead to disaster. Wallace persisted. His company's early hybrid varieties proved themselves in field trials. Farmers who planted Pioneer seeds consistently harvested more bushels per acre. In regions prone to drought, Wallace's varieties showed better resilience. Where pests were common, certain hybrids demonstrated natural resistance. The timing of Wallace's innovation couldn't have been more critical. By the late 1920s, American agriculture was entering a crisis. Overproduction during World War I had led to a collapse in crop prices. Many farmers couldn't cover their costs even with good harvests. Then came October 1929 and the stock market crash that triggered the Great Depression. The 1930s were devastating for rural America. Farm income plummeted by more than 50%. Families who had worked the same land for generations lost everything to foreclosure. And then, as if economic catastrophe wasn't enough, the weather turned against them. The Dust Bowl began in 1930 and intensified throughout the decade. Decades of intensive farming without proper soil conservation had left the topsoil vulnerable. When severe drought struck the Great Plains, the exposed earth began to blow away in massive dust storms. These weren't minor weather events, they were apocalyptic phenomena. Dust clouds thousands of feet high traveled from Kansas to New York City, blocking out the sun and burying homes, crops, and hope. Henry Wallace, by now Secretary of Agriculture under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, confronted the dual crisis of economic depression and environmental disaster. He implemented programs that would permanently change American agriculture. The Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933 established price supports and production controls. The Soil Conservation Service taught farmers how to prevent erosion through contour plowing, crop rotation, and cover crops. Wallace also fought for rural electrification, understanding that bringing power to farms would enable a new generation of machinery and dramatically improve quality of life. He established crop insurance programs so that farmers wouldn't face total ruin from natural disasters. And he continued promoting hybrid seeds, believing that higher yields per acre would help farmers survive with less land under cultivation. Critics attacked Wallace from all sides. Conservative opponents called his programs socialist interference in free markets. Some farmers resented being told what they could plant. Others didn't understand the long-term thinking behind paying farmers to reduce production when people were hungry. But Wallace saw the bigger picture. He understood that American agriculture needed to transition from quantity to quality, from exhaustive labor to scientific method, from individual struggle to collective support. The changes he championed didn't just help America survive the Depression. They created the foundation for the agricultural abundance that would define the second half of the 20th century. When World War II began in 1939, America faced another agricultural challenge. Once again, Europe needed food desperately. Once again, American farms had to feed not just a nation but an entire alliance. But this time, the situation was completely different from 1918. By 1940, nearly 1 million tractors worked American fields. Hybrid corn varieties had spread across the Midwest, increasing average yields by 25 to 30%. Combine harvesters were replacing manual threshing crews. Rural electrification meant farmers could use electric motors for grinding, pumping, and processing. The transformation that had begun just 2 decades earlier was now the new normal. The contrast between 1918 and 1941 was staggering. In World War I, the United States struggled to increase food production even with millions of acres under cultivation. In World War II, American farms produced more food than ever before with fewer workers. Young men left for military service, but production didn't fall, it rose. The machines and methods that had seemed like luxuries were now the backbone of national security. Henry Wallace, now serving as vice president under Roosevelt, watched his agricultural vision proving itself on the world stage. American grain, beef, and cotton flowed to Britain, to the Soviet Union, to Allied forces across the globe. Farmers who had faced bankruptcy a decade earlier were now patriotic heroes feeding democracy. The end of the war didn't bring collapse as it had after 1918. Instead, American agriculture entered a golden age. The GI Bill helped returning soldiers buy farms. Government programs stabilized prices. International demand remained high as Europe rebuilt. and the technological momentum continued accelerating. By 1950, the average American farm had been utterly transformed. Where once a family might manage 160 acres with horses, now they could handle 320 acres or more with tractors and implements. What once took a dozen workers could now be done by 2 or 3. The grueling physical labor that had defined rural life for millennia was giving way to skilled machinery operation. This shift brought prosperity but also disruption. Small farms that couldn't afford to mechanize were bought by larger operations that could. Rural populations began a long decline that continues today. Small towns that had served as agricultural hubs emptied as fewer families could make a living from farming. The landscape itself changed. As fields grew larger, hedgerows and woodlots were cleared to accommodate bigger machinery. Yet the productivity gains were undeniable and transformative. In 1920, one American farmer produced enough food to feed about 8 people. By 1950, that number had climbed to 15. By 1970, it would reach 50. Today, a single American farmer produces enough food for over 150 people. This extraordinary productivity is why Americans spend a smaller percentage of their income on food than any society in human history. The environmental and social costs of this transformation would become apparent later. Intensive monoculture, heavy chemical use, and soil depletion created problems that farming communities are still addressing today. But in the immediate post-war period, the dominant emotion was pride and optimism. American agriculture had proven that science and technology could overcome natural limits. If you believe stories like this deserve to be shared and remembered, help us reach more people by sharing this video. History isn't just about dates and facts, it's about understanding how we got here. The innovations that transformed American agriculture didn't stay within U.S. borders. Beginning in the 1940s and accelerating through the 1950s and 60s, American agricultural technology and techniques spread worldwide in what became known as the Green Revolution. Norman Borlaug, an American agronomist working in Mexico, applied Wallace's principles of hybrid genetics to wheat. He developed high-yield, disease-resistant varieties that could thrive in diverse climates. When these varieties reached India and Pakistan in the 1960s, they prevented famines that experts had predicted would kill millions. The technology package was comprehensive. Improved seeds, mechanization, irrigation, and fertilizers worked together to multiply yields. Countries that had faced chronic food shortages became self-sufficient. Some even became exporters. The human impact was staggering. The Green Revolution is credited with saving over 1 billion lives from starvation. But the story wasn't simple or universally positive. The new agricultural methods required capital, money for seeds, tractors, irrigation systems, and chemicals. Wealthy farmers benefited enormously. Poor farmers who couldn't afford the inputs were often displaced. Environmental degradation from intensive farming practices created new problems even as hunger was reduced. Still, the core achievement remained revolutionary. The ideas that Henry Wallace and his generation pioneered in Iowa cornfields had reshaped global agriculture. The tractor that seemed like an impossible luxury in 1918 was now standard equipment from Brazil to India to China. Today's farms would be unrecognizable to the farmers of 1918. GPS-guided tractors plant seeds with centimeter precision. Drones monitor crop health. Satellites predict weather and optimize irrigation. Genetic engineering creates crops that produce their own pesticides or withstand herbicides. Vertical farms in urban buildings grow vegetables year-round without soil. Yet the fundamental principle remains what Wallace understood a century ago. Agriculture can be a science, not just a tradition. Progress is possible. Human ingenuity can overcome natural limits. And feeding the world isn't a matter of luck or divine favor. It's a matter of knowledge, innovation, and persistent effort. In 1918, America had virtually no tractors. Farms operated much as they had for centuries. A young man named Henry Wallace looked at this reality and imagined something different. He imagined science replacing superstition. He imagined machines multiplying human effort. He imagined abundance replacing scarcity. That vision became reality through the work of thousands. Engineers who designed better machines, scientists who created better seeds, farmers who took risks on new methods, and policymakers who built systems to support rural prosperity. The empire that fed the world wasn't built by corporations alone. It was built by families who adapted, learned, and believed that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. It was built by people who understood that progress requires both courage and humility. Courage to try new things and humility to learn from failures. Today, when you sit down to a meal, you're consuming the harvest of that 1918 vision. The abundance we take for granted was anything but guaranteed. It was earned through innovation, sacrifice, and an unwavering belief that human beings don't have to accept limits as permanent. If this journey through agricultural history inspired you, subscribe to join our community of people who believe that understanding the past helps us build a better future. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And remember, every great achievement in human history began with someone looking at the world as it was and imagining how it could be different. The tractor that changed everything started as a dream in a dusty workshop. What impossible dream will change tomorrow?